everybody. Welcome back to the How to Podcast series, podcast for podcasters, where we get to meet amazing podcasters as well as guest co-hosts on the show. And that's what I love. It's not an interview, everybody. Back away from the mic. It's not an interview. This is a co-hosted episode. And Andy's here today. And I'm going to promise you one thing in this conversation, everyone, as you listen to this. It's going to get really awkward with Andy here on the show. It's going to be very, very awkward in a good way. And you're going to love listening to Andy and hear his journey as a podcaster. You're all about another podcast you need to fall in love with today. And we'll have links to everything in the show notes as always. Andy, welcome to the How to Podcast series as my guest co-host. Let's make things awkward. Come on.
Let's do it, Dave. I am excited to be here. Thanks for having me on. Let's get awkward.
All right, let's get awkward, everybody. Here we go. It's going to get everyone lean forward. We're going to jump in. Why are things going to get so awkward, Andy? Can you explain?
Well, in short, I'm the own your awkward guy. That's what I do. I help people take their awkward thing, might be an insecurity or might feel quirky, and turn it into your superpower. So I don't have a day go by that someone isn't asking me about awkward or making an awkward reference. And usually I'm making things awkward just by sticking my foot in my mouth or doing something weird.
Okay, so give me an Andy awkward moment, something that we can share that kind of gives some light to what you're talking about.
Oh man, just I don't want to say I'm an idiot, but every once in a while I'm a little bit naive, and I've had moments where I'll just say something where I think I'm being a smartass and realize that it just doesn't land well, and it's like, okay, maybe I should have read the room a little bit more on that. But I try to take a step back and at least explain it or get some light drawn to the subject.
I know when I've crossed that line when my wife looks at her feet. I'm like, oh okay, there we go. Right. That's it. Dave's gone too far. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep. You're like, okay, something just happened.
Yeah.
What did I say?
What happened there? Yeah, I like that. Talk about your website. I got it up while we're chatting here. Okay. I'd love to dive into this and also your podcast.
Yeah. So my website's awkwardcareer.com. I lean into motivational speaking and coaching. I also do a little bit of comedy, and then I'm an author. So I have some books that are on there as well. But most of what I do is self-deprecating humor and sharing the lessons that I've learned along the way in my own journey or in interviewing other people to help people live a good life. So it's all about, let's have fun. Let's make fun of it in a way that's not mean. And then let's actually take those lessons that are actually really deep and meaningful so that we can make life easier and more fun and fulfilling.
And we can listen to things get awkward with your guests on your podcast. Talk about your show too.
Yeah, so on my show, it's called Own Your Awkward. Each episode, I have a different guest on, and I ask them what awkward thing they've had to own in order to live a good life and how to take their insecurity or thing they didn't feel good about, flip it, and use it as a springboard to success rather than a weight that's holding them back. And it's one of the favorite things I do because I have just conversations with people from every walk of life. I don't care where someone's coming from. I want to know their story. And the more diverse and different, the better. And we're going to have you on soon. I look forward to this episode coming out. So all of the listeners today, you want to hear Dave share a little bit that maybe you don't get to hear on this show or on as many other shows. We're going to ask you the question: what's that awkward thing you've had to own?
Man, okay. Well, it's definitely going to get awkward having me on your show, and I'm excited for that. It's going to be great. I love your website too. I love all the colorful images you have for all your episodes. Really amazing how you've done all this stuff, Andy. It's a great website. It's a great podcast. I'm enjoying listening to it as well. So if they had a new listener come to your show, first time ever coming to you, where would you like them to start? Most recent episode, the first? Where would you like them to begin?
That's a great question. There's things that I love from the very first couple episodes. And it's interesting to look back on them and go, man, my tech, my skills, my things. It's like I hate for that to be someone's first impression in those ways. But some of those conversations are still some of my favorites. The most recent always has a new twist on it, and I feel like we're always improving. My episode 100 is really special to me because that was a reverse episode where one of my counterparts, one of my best friends, accountability partners, and fellow podcaster interviewed me about what my awkward was. So that's a little different twist because it's usually the show is all about focusing on the guest. So it was a little backwards take.
Okay, good. That's always nice to know where to start because I think when we show up at a new podcast and you have many episodes. I'm seeing 122 on the website right now, but as you have multiple episodes, it's really hard to decide where to begin. You start looking at all the titles and you're like, I don't know. So it's kind of nice to get some direction from the host. That's good.
Yeah, and along those lines, I heard someone make a suggestion, and it was probably Marie who interviewed me on my show, where she had heard the idea of creating a playlist of your top 10 or your favorites. So when you get that question, you have a separate playlist curator. You can say, here, listen to these. These are my best variety, or for different reasons, a little different assortment.
Yeah. I know for this show, I've got over 500 episodes. And for somebody who shows up, they're like, what the heck am I going to do with this? Like, I have no idea where to begin. Right. And I love sending people back into the catalog too. So if this is your first episode, hi, welcome to the show. But there's like 500 other episodes to listen to. So what I've been doing on YouTube as a way to kind of help organize these things is I'm trying to group them by kind of the subject matter, so that they're kind of putting them into buckets, little playlists, so that, if I have somebody on that talks about making money with your podcast, well, here's a group of episodes in relation to making money. And here's a group of episodes around tech. And here's a group of episodes around mindset. Like I'm trying to just group them so they're a little bit smaller of a bucket to kind of navigate than trying to go through 500 episodes and figure out where to begin. Right. So,
yeah, I like that idea. And I just heard you share something along those lines on one of your latest episodes about putting new life into older episodes, how if Father's Day is coming up and you have shows that are featuring fathers, create that playlist. And it made me think about, I've got, with the 120 episodes that I have, I've got, 3 or 4 that are perfectionists, or 3 or 4 that are introverts, and I could start grouping them together, or body image things. There's certain things where I could put, okay, this has a theme that we could put together to help, if you want to stay in a certain space with those conversations.
Yeah, I'm doing it also for my Living the Next Chapter, my author podcast, which are going to come on as well. That one's all authors, and they're all about different topics. So I'll have historical fiction, I'll have romance books, I'll have children's books, I'll have cookbooks. Like, I'm talking about everything, right? I'm at Hollywood actors. So if you want to get all of my Hollywood actors, here's a playlist with all the Hollywood actors that have been on my show.
I love that.
Right?
Wow.
So it kind of narrows it down.
Yeah, the one that I did so far, the only playlist I created specifically for my podcast that was separate, was a playlist of local connections, because I'm bringing people in from all over the world, but I do have a pretty good following in our local community. And every once in a while, people want to know, who are the people from our hometown, or I want to know those. I'm like, here, go to this. It's 253 connections, because that's our area code here. And it makes it a simple, fun way to know, and for me to reference that.
Yeah, and so if YouTube's not your game for your podcast, then maybe like Spotify, you can create a playlist there too, which is shareable.
Right.
If you have a newsletter, you can group all your episodes together by a certain ththing and do a newsletter about that. Send it out to your community so they have one click and they have all your different episodes. It's great.
And on the flip side, another thing that was really an aha moment I had after trying to find shows I've been on is I created one podcast or one playlist for all the shows I've been on.
Smart.
So that I can, if someone's like, oh, what have you been on? I can just send them a link. It's like, here's one playlist. It's everything I've been on. So that's great too.
Yeah. So on top of that, then how are you finding guests for your show? Was it easy? Was it hard at the beginning?
It was easier at the beginning, actually. Well, in a way, it was easy at the beginning because I had a list of people I wanted, and I burned through kind of all my friends. And I say at the beginning, like the very first, 20 episodes, it's like, okay, this is great because I know I want to have Dave on and Sherry on and just start going through the list. Then I got to a point where it was kind of exhausted that, and it got a little harder. But I've gotten better at making sure that now it's gotten easy again because I've gotten better at just going every time I have somebody on, who would you recommend that I be on? Who, you want to make a connection. And that usually, from each guest, I usually get 2 to 5 suggestions. Sometimes it's 1, but it's always giving me enough to work with. And then I challenge myself. Sometimes I do it once a week, sometimes once a month, but on a regular basis, I reach out to somebody famous to be on my show. And this way I can say, welcome to the Own Your Awkward podcast. Guests that have been invited on include Elton John, Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
You're in good company if you've been invited on the show. they're just checking their calendars, I think, before
Yeah.
they come back to me. But
Wait.
I have had some that were people that were bigger than I thought I would have gotten on my show that have replied. And a lot of times it's like I'll be watching a show and I'm like, oh, that's a star, I should invite them on. Or I'll be reading a book by an author. It's like, oh, I need to invite them on. And just in the moment, if I think about it, I'll try to, as soon as possible, figure out whether it's their website, their social media, some way to reach out. I know a lot of those social media outreaches can fall into an abyss, but yeah, every once in a while one will hit, and it's a nice surprise when it's like, oh yeah, I'll be on your show.
Yeah, that's a huge boost, right? To kind of know that somebody's like, yeah, I'll come on. It's like, really? Like, you really will? Oh wow, that's like, that is so cool. And I found when some of my shows, early days for an interview-based podcast, those first 5 interviews, if you don't know a lot of people, that's really hard to convince somebody to come on. And it's just like, how is my show different? Why would you come on? Why would you take a chance on me? You're a big name. I'm a little person just starting, right? So,
right.
Any tips for somebody finding those first 5 guests beyond your social circles?
I think for me, I started with people that I know either through work that I'm doing or through LinkedIn were my original 5. Okay. And part of it, and don't be afraid to think that you have to have a major guest for your first guest. Have a friend on, and even have it be, this is where we're going with this. This is what I'm starting with. This is my first interview. I feel like your listeners love to be there for your journey, and they're like, man, I remember when Andy was recording in his garage and seeing this, and then I saw when he upgraded to his new studio, and if you do things with them on social media, like polls and things like, what do you think about this background or this background? They feel like they're involved in your journey, and they're like, man, I voted. He chose the background. I gave him the feedback to switch this. And that's that community feeling that gets more of a loyal base. So, reach out to your friends that you have, and you might not feel like you're very connected to people, but just say, man, I'm starting a podcast. Do you know someone that would be a good guest? And you'll get some pretty good suggestions. I had some, every once in a while, I'll post something on Facebook or LinkedIn and just something like, hey, who should own their awkward this year? And from those types of things, I'll get a couple guests recommended that are people that I don't know, that some of them I had never heard of. They weren't on my radar, and they were willing to come on. Yeah. So don't be afraid to ask, and don't be afraid to ask other people to help you ask.
Yeah, well, that's how we connected, right? So that's
right.
You just need to put it out there. And there's a line that says something along the lines, you do not have because you do not ask. So if you don't put yourself out there, might get a few no's. I've had no's for my show, but then they come back and they see you're still around years later, and they're like, maybe I will come on. So don't give up. It'll still happen.
I have a folder for anything, and it's not even for podcasts, but also for when I put out requests to be a speaker or to get someone to hire me. My rejection folder in my email, it's called Not Yets.
I like that.
So as soon as I get the rejection, I just put it in the Not Yet folder, and it's like, well, they'll be ready later. And my fees may be higher, or I may not have room on my schedule, but right now it's a not yet.
Yeah. So the whole idea about your podcast and starting it and doing the podcast, where were you getting your information to kind of guide you on how to do this? It's the name of my show. How to podcast. Like, where were you learning all this in the beginning?
So originally, I was a guest on one of the first shows that I guested on when I started focusing on motivational speaking. And a colleague friend of mine had a show, and he invited me on the show. This was 7-8 years ago. And I was super excited to be on this show. You just call in over the radio you call in over the phone, and then there was a service that recorded both of us. And then, he's like, it just gives me the file, and it loads automatically it was Blog Talk Radio at the time. I don't know if they're still around. Yeah. But it cut off exactly at 30 minutes if you didn't pay a big fee to have a bigger thing. It was like, you got 30 minutes. Yeah. So he had me on, and I was telling him, I said, man, Jim, I want to do a podcast. It's one of my goals. This is awesome that you're doing this. Thanks for having me on. And he's like, it's not as far away as you think. And at the time, I was getting caught up in, all the technical advice on what kind of mic I needed to get and lighting. And I don't even, at the time, I don't even think I was worried about lighting because I was doing audio only, but it was like how to record, how to edit, how to post, where to even host it. All these things I didn't have answers to. And he said, you just just do this thing. You both call, you give them a number, and then you're done. And I was like, that is awesome. So I started with that, and that was kind of my entry. But just having someone encourage me and show me how easy it was to get in. Now I've since moved on. I record them on Zoom and upload them to Spotify and YouTube, and then they go out to the world from there. But that gives me more flexibility and timing. But just that idea that you don't have to know all the things. There's plenty of free services you can host your site on to get started. And that was great. And it's funny, I look back at some of my early episodes. I remember racing to get off the call with guests because I'm like, it's about to cut us off. Okay, thanks, bye. And sometimes I don't even think I got those words out. And so some of the early episodes, which were great conversations, but then all of a sudden it's like, we're done.
Yeah, right.
So I almost need to, from listening to a couple episodes of this podcast and you're talking about redoing your intro and stuff. It's like I should almost just go put a new intro on the beginning going, this is one of my early episodes. This is why, this is there. And that fits into my brand about owning your awkward is calling out that thing that's a little bit different and just being okay saying, this is kind of funny that this happened, but it does make it quirky and fun. And then it might even have a side effect of actually encouraging people to listen to the whole episode to get to that end and be like, let's see if that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, that's a good draw. I like that. I'm a musician. I've been doing music for 45 years. I feel really old saying that out loud. But one thing I find with a new band, a new act, their first album ever that they record took a lifetime to do. They've never recorded in the past. This is their first time ever recording their music and putting it out there. It took them an entire lifetime, right? The next album's going to be a year from now, right? And a year from that, and a year from that. So they are going to improve. They're going to get better as musicians because they're playing more now. But that first album is really special. So I like the idea of your first episodes being unique and different and awkward, owning your awkward. I like that because it gives kind of everyone permission to go, I don't have to be perfect to start, right?
Right.
But to start is the beginning of you becoming better at something, right? You'll never get to episode 10 without episode 1. It's never going to happen. You have to do episode 1 to get to 10. So I just love the idea that people can go back in time and go, oh, listen to Andy struggle through this. I love this. It's because it gives us all permission to go, we don't have to be perfect.
Right. And that's the thing is, one thing I've tried to stay true to no matter what is that at the heart of everything I'm doing, it's got to be about the conversation. And, there were times where I didn't have a very good mic and people are like, what kind of mic are you using? I'm like, well, if you're caught up in that and you can't listen to my podcast because it isn't perfect audio quality, then you're not my audience. Like, just be here for the show. And sure, I did upgrade my mic when I had the opportunity and when I could and was more experienced. But when you get started, and even if you're years in, just work with what you have and make sure it's a good conversation because that's the whole point.
Yeah. I did an episode around Theodore Roosevelt's quote, do what you can with what you have where you are. Right. And I think in podcasting, we need to hear more of that because we're always thinking I need like 5 more courses, 5 more books, 5 more gurus. I need 5 more of this. I need 5 more mics, 5 more years of practice before I start. And I'm like, do what you can with what you have where you are. Because then as you do those things, you're going to grow and get better over time and you'll get to where you want to be. But it's not about the courses. It's not about spending all this money and investing in yourself and filling your head with knowledge about podcasting. I told somebody, Andy, a while back that if you want to be a skydiver, you got to get in the plane and you got to step out of the door.
Right.
You can read as many books as you want about skydiving, but until you step out of the door of a moving airplane at X number of feet in the air, you are not a skydiver.
Right. And, that goes along with a recent blog I've been working on, which kind of my theme for this year is to learn less. And I say that meaning I tend to think I need to learn all these things in order to be effective. And in order to take the next steps, I need to learn more. And it's like, I got to go learn this and I got to learn that. But at some point, you got to put the book down and implement what you've already learned. And then you get to a point where you need to learn some more. But like I've become a fan of reading a chapter of a book and then implementing what I learned from the chapter and not trying to finish the whole book and then go implement stuff. It's like, okay, let's learn a little bit and then go do. Because the whole point of learning is doing. And if we're not getting to the doing, if we're not getting in the plane, then it doesn't matter how much you learn about skydiving. At some point, you got to get in the plane. And then maybe what you learned was, oh, you forgot to pack your parachute. So then next time it's like, well, now I'm going to take my parachute on the plane. I'm going to learn a little more. Yeah. But we got to take those steps. And it goes hand in hand with what you were saying.
Hopefully there is a next time if you forgot your parachute. But yeah.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so let's put it in context of something you're going to really love. What do you find awkward in podcasting today that makes you kind of either go a different path or you found a different way to do something that was awkward for you as a podcaster? How did you adapt? What did you change? You got any examples?
I feel like my show is always evolving because I feel like I've gone through points where I've gotten into a little bit of a formula on the conversation, and then I feel like I'm getting bored with not with the conversation with my guest, but with I don't want it to be just a cookie cutter. My guest, I don't want my listeners to know he's going to ask this, and this. So then I have to mix it up and go, okay, what are we going to do different so that every time my guest shows up, they know there's going to be a good conversation. They know the heart of what it's about, but maybe not the direction where it's going to go. In my early episodes, I remember spending a lot of time at the beginning getting to know my guest. And then I realized, and this was those early episodes where it cut off at half an hour, and it would take me until 20 minutes in to get to the awkward. And I'm like, wait, the show's supposed to be about awkward, and we just talked about what they do for a living for 20 minutes, and now we just start getting into a really good conversation, and now we're getting cut off. So I started moving that way forward and just being like, let's have a quick opening and then get into more awkward stuff, because that's the whole point. And I'm even just now making a switch in some of the conversation. I've been asking my guests a lot about what's positive stuff they see, but I'm actually going to overhaul some of that so that everything we talk about is just all awkward. Like, how do you define awkward? And I may mix up how we open it. Sometimes one thing, sometimes another. What's your most awkward thing? Or what's an awkward story? But just keeping it on the awkward. And my thing is, sure, I want you to get to know our guests while we're there, but their bio is in the description. You may or may not already know who the guest is. So I don't want to bore my listeners with what they already see in the lineup leading up to the episode. And once we get to know them about their awkward, then we get into, okay, what do you have going on? What do we want to make sure that we promote? But like I say, it's a journey, and that's this snapshot in time's, thought of what I'm doing with it. By the time this airs, I may have learned something else that I thought, oh wait, I got to add this in. So. Yeah.
Do you have any, being an interview-based podcast, do you have any questions that you love to ask your guests that, just is something unique to your content, to the awkwardness of your podcast? Is there anything that you like to throw at your guests if you're looking for the next question?
I like to make sure that I'm really listening, which is hard when you're in a conversation. Yeah. And when you're in a conversation that's interview based, where you need to be on your toes enough to be ready to ask a question, but not have it so preset that you're not engaging with what they just said. And you just, you answer something and it's heartfelt and meaningful. And then all of a sudden I go, so tell me about fifth grade, or, So what I try to do is, I love when my guests are willing to go deep. When someone comes on my show, I tell them, you can go as surface level or as deep as you're willing to go. However, it's going to be more meaningful and more impactful the deeper that you go. I'm not going to push you to share things you're not comfortable sharing. However, if you want to empower people, the more vulnerable you are, the more meaningful it's going to be. So when someone shares their awkward, the questions that I like to really lean into are, I kind of follow the, like, how did you know that you needed to make this change in your life? And into the who, like, how did it affect the people around you? How did they take it? How did you react? How did that, what did you get? Like, how was that when you interacted with people in a different way?
Mm-hmm.
And really get into how the person felt. Like, how did that feel when you shared something raw, when you made the change? And just follow that journey with my guest, which requires me to really pay attention to what they're sharing, and just know that, okay, my next question, or I know that after they share this, I'm going to get into feeling and next steps and advice. And if I know that those are the things I want to get out of it, it doesn't really matter what question, because my questions are going to get to those no matter how I ask them, but it will be conversational.
Right. And that's 122 episodes worth of experience talking there for your show. So as you're listening to this as a new podcaster, you're like, how am I supposed to do that? I've got 2 interviews lined up. I haven't even recorded yet.
Yeah.
How am I supposed to do what you just said to do?
Well,
it's practice.
yeah.
Right?
And it's practice, and there is value in listening. When you listen to other podcasts, listen to the types of questions that the hosts are asking. Sometimes hosts will ask things that are very short. They'll just say, "How do you do that?" Or what would you do here? And they don't go into an elaborate question. And I think we sometimes feel like we need to add more words in to look credible. Yet I was watching a podcast yesterday, and the guy, I haven't seen him before. A friend sent it to me, but it was something power with a Q around it, and he's in Toronto.
Okay.
But he was interviewing Daniel Levy, and Daniel Levy mentioned something, and all he said was, "I don't know what that is." That's how he replied to Daniel Levy. And Daniel Levy was referring to a book that's called, like, Catch the Cat or Chase the Cat or something like that, about screenplay writing. But all the host said was, "I don't know what that is." And it's very open-ended. It left it to the guest, because I have tended in the past to give my guests options, and I've been practicing not saying, "Did it feel like this or did it feel like that?" and just say, "How did it feel?"
Yeah.
And that's something I'm still working on.
That feels like leading the witness for like a lawyer, right?
Right.
If you give them options, now they can pick from these options instead of just getting them to tell you the truth.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's a good analysis, is that leading the witness, where you just go, I'm going to let you take it wherever. And I can listen to certain episodes where sometimes I feel like some of my earlier episodes, I was in some ways better in that, because I was more on my toes about, it's like I was a little more nervous about interviewing. So I was very careful about making sure that I was interviewing well. And then as I got experience, I got a little bit more relaxed, and then had to bring back this is something that you're curating. You're curating the conversation as much as it is a conversation. So you have to take the lead in where it's going, but in a way that is as open as possible, and practice, just practice asking questions. And it carries over into life, because when I meet people, just networking or in business or personally, it allows me to ask better questions, because I've been practicing it in front of everybody on the podcast.
yeah, I like that you said listening to other podcasts to pick up on what they do. One of the homework exercises I give to new podcasters who reach out for advice on an interview podcast and having their own is to go listen to a podcast that you have zero interest in. Like, you have no idea about the topic. Right. You're not going to get caught up in the conversation because you don't know what they're talking about. So it might be a podcast around chicken farming. You're like, I'm not a chicken farmer. I have no interest in this topic. But then listen to the host and listen to how they introduce their guest. Listen to some of the questions and how they form the questions. Listen to the outro and go, from this experience, what do I like and what do I not want? What works for me, what doesn't? Make a list. And then go to another episode of something else unrelated. How to change your oil or something, a podcast about that for your car. I have no interest in that. I just take it and somebody does it for me. So, but listen to the podcast and listen to how it's formulated, and then take out the nuggets that you like without getting caught up in the conversation. You're not there for that. You're just there to learn the how-to part of how they're doing the thing, and then just pick out the things you like.
What would you say when people look at all the things that we need to learn to start podcasting, between questioning and technical things? What would you say people should spend their most energy focusing on learning?
I like pointing people to identify what good looks like and sounds like to them as a starting point. Because if you don't know what good artwork looks like, it's going to be hard to choose your artwork. If you don't know what a good sounding intro sounds like, it's going to be hard to come up with your intro. If you don't know how long a podcast is good to you, then it's going to be hard to determine that, right? So any homework that you can do before you reach out to help somebody will definitely be a benefit to you. Just jump on your phone, go on your Spotify or Apple, and just pick a category and just sort through and scroll through all the different artwork until something catches your eye and go, I like that. I'm going to screenshot that and I'm going to keep do it again. Oh, I like that. Screenshot it. And just what is it about it? Is it the colors? Is it the font? Is it the image of the person or the not image of the person? Something's about the image of the artwork is going to catch your attention. That's what good looks like to you. And then listen to the podcast, watch the podcast, whatever it is for you. And then kind of create a little list of the things that you really admire from all these other shows. And that becomes kind of a foundation for you to say, this is what good looks like or sounds like to me. And now I kind of have a little bit of guardrails for my show where I can kind of know what I want to stay between this and this. And I'm going to go in this direction now. So that's kind of a homework exercise before we even get to the part about naming your show and all of the microphones and all that other stuff. What does good look like to you?
I like that you leave it open to the subjectivity of what does it look like to you? Because I know whenever I've tried to find the answer on how something should be, I mean, that awful word should, right? Where it's like, how long should a podcast be? What should the artwork look like? And for everyone who says it should be 20 minutes or less, you see the popularity of shows that are 2 to 4 hours. And they're, some of the number one podcasts are really long. And now, granted, they didn't probably start out at that length of time. However, you have to do what feels right for you. And I found that the depth of conversation I'm getting to in my show, I can't do it in 20 minutes. Because by the time we get comfortable, get opened up, we're just getting into something good and then it's over. So we tend to be 35 to 45 minutes. I'm not ready to go hours and hours. If I'm making a living just podcasting and I'm sitting at a chair for 4 hours, that's great. Fine. I'd love to have those conversations, but yeah.
Yeah. And there's a lot of noise in podcasting. That's kind of why I wanted to have this show and bring you on, is I want to get perspectives from people actually podcasting. And because everybody does it a little bit differently, and there's no one way to do this. Anytime I hear somebody say there's a rule in podcasting you must follow, that's called gatekeeping, and that's the opposite of what podcasting is meant to be. Everybody, anyone, anywhere should be able to do this, and you don't have to do it a certain way. So I didn't want this show to be Dave's way to podcast, because I only know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. So that's not fair to anybody. So bringing you on, at least we can hear someone else's perspective and go, I like how Andy approaches podcasting, and I'm going to steal some of his awkwardness and put it in my show.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had to get really real with myself about was remembering why I podcast. And for me, it's simple. It's I have this vision and passion to help people embrace their awkwardness, and I can only tell my story so much that I get tired of hearing my own story. So I want to hear other people's stories, and people need to learn from other people's stories because they're going to learn from other perspectives. So for me, it's both bringing other people's stories to light and helping me with my message. It's essentially, I'm doing research in the podcast every time I talk to somebody, every time I interview, and it helps get the message out to bigger audiences. So when I remember that the reason I'm doing this is because of the conversation and because it's part of my message, it keeps me from getting caught up in, well, if I didn't get enough listeners this week, is it worth doing? Or if I didn't get to this threshold, or if I'm not monetized in these ways, is the podcast worth doing? Because I used to get really frustrated if I had low views on stuff. And I still have plenty of episodes that have low views, and then I have some that hit better. But to me, it doesn't matter because it's about that conversation.
Okay. One of the things we're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes here, I do every month I do what I call my question of the month. Other people do this as well. I like to do this on the show so that I can raise awareness of other podcasts that people should listen to. It's a way to advertise your show, tell people about your podcast, introduce yourself. What I do is I collect responses and I make an episode of combined responses for the month. And I'm just asking my audience, my listeners and other podcasters to answer the question and then promote themselves at the same time. So for you, Andy, you'll be talking about your show. Hi, my name is Andy. This is the name of my show. And my answer to the question is this. So the question for the month is, what is the goal that you have for your podcast this year in 2025? So as you think about that for a second, kind of like, what is your one overarching goal for your show? Not like 25 goals, but one kind of overarching goal for your show. What is that for you, the show itself, whatever you want to go to? But then if you can frame it with, hey, this is Andy from your Own Your Awkward podcast, and my answer to the question of the month is, and then if you can do that for me, I'm going to take that snippet out of our conversation today and put you in that episode with all the other people that are responding. But do you think you could do that for us as we're kind of getting closer to the end?
I can do that. I'm like, what's my one overall goal?
What is your goal? Yeah.
Well, it's been growing viewership, but really my main goal this year is to make sure I've got an episode every week. I'm hitting hard to make sure I don't miss any episodes. So that's on the technical side. Really, yeah. And this is one of those things, if you don't know what you're going for, you're going to miss it. And so it's really that. And just really making sure that I'm growing the audience through bringing awareness to the podcast. Okay. And so I'm doing a lot more clips, a lot of different ways to get it in front of people, and making sure that I don't drop the ball on getting the information to my guests, all that kind of stuff. So
okay, when you say growing your audience, what exactly are you trying to grow within your audience?
Well,
because that's pretty big term. Like, my audience.
It's pretty vague. Yeah. Right. I mean, I would like to get to where I've got. Well, it's tricky because it's both on YouTube. I got different audiences between YouTube and Spotify, but I should narrow down a number. I'd like to get to where I'm monetized on at least one of the platforms.
Okay.
So like on YouTube, I'd need to be at 1,000 followers to make that happen.
Okay. Good. Because the one thing I push back when people say I want to grow my show, and I'm like, okay, grow how? Because you could grow the depth of your audience. You could have 5 people who listen to your show, but you know them by name. Like that's a different type of depth and growth than just 5 people. You could have 100 people who listen to your show, but they listen to every episode of your show. So that's a different type of growth, right?
Yeah.
They fall in love with everything you do compared to just today's episode at Forward. I've gone back and listened to all 122 episodes. So that's a different type of growth. So when I see that in Facebook groups, hey, I want to grow my show, my response is, grow how? In numbers, in depth, in length of listen. That's another one. Do they come for 10 seconds or a minute and leave from your 45-minute episode? They listen to 1 minute of 45 minutes. Is that wouldn't it be better for them to listen to 45 minutes? Is that not growth?
Right. That's growth. I've been paying attention to that a lot more since our first conversation, where you said, well, you might have new viewers showing up, but not sticking around or not coming back. I'm like, oh, I do have a decent amount of, probably 3/4 of my listeners are new listeners. It seems like when I look at my numbers, and I've really only been looking at that the last couple weeks since we chatted. And it's like, oh, there's something to tap into there to figure out something in the formula to retain them, to get them to come back.
Yeah. So when I hear people say that I have a growth problem for my show, I'm like, well, maybe you don't. Maybe you have a retention problem. You have a problem keeping them. You got new people coming through the door every day, but they walk right through your house and right out the back door. So maybe if you shut the back door and keep them in the audience without kidnapping, if you could keep them in your audience longer,
give them a reason to stay,
you'd see your numbers go up faster because they come and stay because they love you and they love the amazing conversations you have on your show. So having them listen longer, have them stay, have them connect with you, hearing from them, getting interaction with your audience, Those are all growth metrics that people don't really talk about. They have a number in their mind. If I hit 100,000 downloads,
Right.
then I'm successful. Well, the moment you hit 100,000, you're going to want 200,000. So
Right.
you're going to be chasing your tail forever. If that's the only metric that really means anything to you, I'd much rather have listeners who interact with me and connect with me and I know them by name than a bunch of numbers of people I've never met, right? That's
Right.
kind of
That's
how I
that's
look at
that's
it.
a great point.
Yeah.
And that is something that when I've gotten frustrated with numbers, I sometimes have come back to, well, sometimes I'm less focused on the numbers because I'm more about the conversations and the content. Like I want to have content and conversations with the most unique people I can find. So I don't want to race people through just to post an episode.
Yeah.
I would rather skip an episode than create something just to say I checked a box. But then sometimes it makes me take the finger off of looking at numbers going, oh, it's fine. I don't care. It's like, well, it is a business. It would be good to be monitoring some of that and monetizing it. So
Amazing. Awesome. Andy, it's so great to have you here on the podcast. I love Own Your Awkward. Can you tell us again where to go to connect with you? And I would love, Andy, if we could ever have you back, because I'm sure we could talk podcasting forever, but you're a great person to talk to. You're really fun. And I love everything that you do. And I'll just keep the door open for you. Anytime you want to come back and talk podcasting, please come back. But tell us where to go. And again, where to connect with you. Maybe a sneak peek. What's coming up on the podcast?
for sure. Yeah. You can check out all of my social media is all Awkward Career. And my website's awkwardcareer.com, or just if you type in Own Your Awkward, I'm going to pop right up on any of the Google sites, and easy to find. There's links to everything right there. And so later on today, one of my most recent episodes that's going to be coming out, I'm interviewing the owners of a brewery down in Georgia, which I'm really excited about because it's awkward brewing. And a friend of mine went there when they were on vacation. I'm up in Washington State, so this is thousands of miles away, and so it's just kind of fun to have that co-branding. We've been following each other on social media the last couple of years, ever since my friend made the connection, and so it's just kind of fun to have this really unique, different, extra awkward podcast that's like, oh, cool, and that's what I love about my guests. Sometimes it'll be a comedian, an author, a brewery owner, so it's just fun to have people from every walk of life, because it's just all about that journey. So yeah, find me online, awkwardcareer.com. Got a whole host. You can see all the podcast, clips, right? You can just click on them there and go to whatever service you like.
And if you're looking for a great speaker for your next event, definitely reach out to Andy as well. It looks like all the fun pictures you have on your website of you with groups. Looks like you guys have a lot of fun times. I love this. This is amazing.
We have an awesome fun. I'm told that it's very relatable, which is my goal, is to relate to the crowd and help them take something away that they can implement.
Amazing. Everyone, go listen to a very awkward podcast and awkwardly share this with all of your friends. And you have complete permission to be as awkward as you need to be in life. Andy's there to support you in that. And a great podcast to listen to. Go subscribe, follow, share, do all the things that Andy asks you to do, because we want to help him grow his show. And if you're looking for something fun to listen to, go check out his podcast. Andy, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast all the way through to the end. I love having these great guest co-hosts on the show to share their podcast with you. You have some homework to do. And what I'm asking of you is to go check out our featured guest co-host today. Go over and listen to their podcast. The links are always in the show notes. And I'd love for you to go and give them your love and support. And I think if we can all do that for each other, podcasting will be a lot more fun for all of us. So it's time to do what you've asked others to do for you. It's time to do for this guest co-host. Links in the show notes. Go over and check out their show and leave them a review. Do the follow. Go listen to their episodes in full, the entirety of an episode, which again shows to the apps that it's a good podcast, because you're going there and you're staying to the end. It's probably one of the best ways you can help a podcaster grow their audience and be shown to more people is by simply going and listening wherever you listen to the very end, like you're doing right now here. This is the perfect way to signal to wherever you're listening on, this is a podcast worth promoting. And all of the apps want you to stay on as long as possible. So go over and listen to our guest co-host episode and leave them some feedback. If they have a buy me a coffee, send them a coffee. If they have a speak pipe, send them a voice message. If they have an email, send them an email. If they're on Instagram, send them a direct message. Do something to support our guest co-hosts. They've given up their time to be here with you, to be here with me, and we can give that back to them with time and attention, our love, our support. Thank you for doing all that for me as well. Here on the How to Podcast series, we'll talk to you soon for our next episode.